I don't know why. I pressed the confirmation. Now we are live once again. Hello, I'm Avi Grossman. This is Parashat Talk. We'd like to welcome once again Rabbi Chananya Weissman, back by popular demand, the longtime columnist for the Jewish press and activist in the world of Shidduchim. This week's Parashat is Parashat Toldot. Just to date today's presentation, I think in the United States they had an election a few weeks ago. I think that people are pretty much convinced of who won that election, although one of the contestants has yet to concede. We have yet to see what God has in store. And I hope for those of you who are in America, good afternoon, by the way, and good morning, and hope that whatever God has planned for you, it is for the best. But I still also hope that you come and join us here in Israel. This week's Parashat is Toldot, and it's introduced with a piece of a story with which we are familiar with from last week, that Yitzchak Avinu, our patriarch Isaac, married Rivka, Rebecca, the daughter of Bethuel, the sister of Lavan the Aramean, and that shidduch, that match, takes center stage in last week's Parsha. It actually takes up an inordinate amount of space in Psukim. Perhaps the sages, perhaps the Torah is, as the sages are pointing out to us, that in God's eyes, certain things are of the utmost importance. Even the casual conversation of Avram Avinu's own servants is that important. And of course, a proper shidduch. Rabbi Weissman used to tell us that when do you learn about shidduchim? The week of Parashat Chayei Sarah, and that was his marmakomos for this particular thing. In the middle of the Parasha, we read about how Esav got married. He had actually apparently got involved in two marriages around the same time, and his parents did not like those matches. Rivka herself expresses this to Yitzchak at the end of this week's Parsha and enjoins Yaakov Avinu, go get yourself a good shidduch from someone, one of your cousins back in Aram, in the city of Haran, back perhaps the daughter of your uncle Lavan. And Yaakov Avinu then receives a similar command from Yitzchak, go do, like your mother says, go get yourself a proper wife. And Esav himself even takes this lesson to heart. Esav says to himself, oh, yeah, my first two wives are not that, have not found favor in the eyes of my parents. And it says that he married someone a little bit closer to the family, a daughter of Ishmael. Rabbi Weissman, perhaps you could tell us, what needs to be said to the Jewish community with regards to shidduchim right now? What is the state of shidduchim? What needs to be fixed? What can be fixed? Please tell me.
Well, gosh, we could talk for hours and hours and hours about this. So I want to focus on just
40 minutes. 40 minutes.
Sorry, 30 minutes?
40 minutes.
Okay, well, we'll try to make the most of it.
Okay.
I would say, first of all, that if the Orthodox world wanted to make a system that was as painful and failed and inefficient as possible on purpose, out of malice, they could hardly have done much better than what they've currently constructed for singles. It's really that bad. It's not just that we need to tweak this and make a small change here. We need a massive overhaul of the system because it's really, really not working. And I would say that the people who do get married and stay married and they're happily married, it's really in spite of all that's wrong with the system. It's not because of it. It's really that bad. Now, in my first book on the subject, and the Madness Guide to the Shidduch World, there's two parts of the book. The first part is called the problem, and the second part is called the solution. The first part, the problem, I unpeel all of the various layers of the Shidduch world, how things got to be the way they are today. It wasn't always this way. People believe, or they say, that it was always this way. This is the way the Shidduch world always operated, dating back to Har Sinai. It's absolutely not true. Speak to grandparents, speak to people older than the age of 50 or 60, old timers, they'll tell you the way it used to be. It was very, very different than what it was today, and it worked much better. So I peel away the various layers of what's different today, how it got to be this way, why changes were made, how those changes have backfired. And then the second part of the book, after tearing down the system, I build it back up again. So in short form, what's wrong with the system today is pretty much everything. And that's bad news. But the good news is that I don't think it's that difficult to make things better. We can't necessarily have a perfect system. I don't think there can be a perfect system. I can't point to any single and say, this is what you need to do to get married. I don't have a magic answer for any person. But as a society and as a system, I think there are some basic things that we can do very, very easily that would make massive, massive positive changes to the shidduch world, and that's what I'd like to focus on. When people ask me, tell me quickly 1, 2, 3 things that we can do to make things better. My answer that I've learned to give them is really the form of a question: as what are you willing to do? Because that's really the better question to ask. What are people willing to change? Because I can rattle off a lot of things that need to change, and people are going to say either that we can't do it, it's not practical, people aren't going to listen. So I say, what are you actually willing to do? And I think most people are really willing to change almost nothing out of fear of what other people are going to think, out of fear that they or their children might not get married if they buck the system. So what it really boils down to is not so much what needs to be done, but what people are willing to do. And I think the easiest thing that would make a very, very big difference that everybody can do is to have mixed seating at weddings, at least for singles. If husbands and wives don't want to sit with each other, that's their business. I'm not involved in their shalom bayis or their tznius issues. That's between them. But at the very least for the singles, the friends of the chassid and kala, they should enjoy that wedding meal together, because there is no better environment for singles to meet. You have friends of the chassid and the kala, probably have similar backgrounds, probably have things in common. They're dressed nicely. There's marriage in the air. It's a positive, festive atmosphere, and it's not a singles event. So it's not awkward and contrived and full of pressure like a typical singles event. They genuinely want to be there, irrespective of dating opportunities. So they're meeting people in a natural environment with no pressure, that they have something in common with. And every wedding can easily lead to an additional wedding, just by allowing singles to have dinner together. There's no pressure on anybody. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't take any extra planning on anybody's part. All you need to do is let the singles sit at the same table and have dinner together. And some of them will naturally like each other and want to follow up. That is a change that we can make right now for everybody to commit that at the next simcha that they are fortunate to have, they allow the singles to sit together. That will lead to many more marriages. It will not solve everybody's problems. It will not fix everything wrong with the shidduch system, but it will make a massive improvement, a massive difference. Many people will get married that way without any stress or money or effort on anybody's part. And when I say this to people, they freak out. We can't do this. We can't do this. What are my relatives going to say? What's the rabbi going to say? It's not done. It's not done. So they're going to protest this. I say, here's something that you can do right now, guaranteed to help people get married. No skin off your back. No work on anybody's part. And you're unwilling to do it. Don't ask me what else needs to be done, because you're not really willing to do anything. So I think that's really step one.
15 years ago, when I was getting married. Wow, there's a major delay, so we'll try to deal with that. 15 years ago, I was, I think it's because of reading something that you wrote. I was very insistent about this. We know that Rav Tendler, that was his opinion. And Rav Schechter also says this, or at least he used to say it. Rabbi Weissman, I think we lost you there. Okay.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Right. And he used to say this, and I would also add that, yes, we were actually had quite a lot of success, but you're talking just about the wedding. The same is true for the Sheva Brachas. You have a whole week of similar opportunities. I used to tell people it's not fair that only the chassan and kala get to get married. And I think we have actually, as a couple, we were able to make quite a few shidduchim with this method. I remember I encouraged a fellow from Yeshiva the last time, go sit next to any of my wife's friends. They're decent. They're going to pair up anyways. And it worked. It worked many times. And I wanted to share with you that although people who, let's say, went to YU and similar places are aware of this idea, and they can, and their Rabbanim are aware of this, I was very surprised when I came to Israel. I heard about this, but I only saw this actually in print. It turns out Merkaz Harav, which is the flagship seminary, if for lack of an American term here, of Rabbanim here in Israel in the religious Zionist movement, and they actually have a handbook that says that they will not tolerate mixed seating at weddings. That's something that they've accepted upon themselves. If you want to be part of the club, you cannot have that, neither at Sheva Brachas, neither at weddings, any event, no mixed seating whatsoever. And I'm very surprised. We all know that, for example, the Chafetz Chaim was also a fan of mixed seating, not necessarily because of weddings and what we're saying, but he was aware of Hasidim who had this this point of view that everything has to be separate, even at Shabbos meals, and he did not look kindly on that. And I'm very surprised that this is something that you can actually find in a book that people have to swear allegiance to, as though it's a part of the Torah.
I never heard that, and
Yeah.
that's horrible. That's really terrible. I was interviewed by a Cleveland newspaper many years ago when I first started in the madness. I was still a smicha student at the time, and I wasn't planning on being a pulpit rabbi, and I'm not. But the interviewer asked me. I guess they assumed that most people getting smicha are going to take a job as a pulpit rabbi at some point. They asked me, what will you do if people ask you to be a misader kiyadushin at a wedding where they don't have mixed seating? Because I was so outspoken about it even at the time. And I said I would tell them to find a different rabbi.
Okay.
That's how strongly I feel about it. I really feel that rabbis should put their foot down and say, if you're going to be so cruel to singles, you expect them to come to your wedding and buy you a gift and dance and give you simcha, and then you're going to say, this simcha is only for us. You sit over there, and we're not going to allow you to experience the simcha that we're having. But maybe some old lady on the other side of the partition will take pity on you and maybe give you a phone number. That's the breadcrumb that we're willing to throw you, and you can have a piece of our challah. Maybe it's a segula for something. I wouldn't want to be a rabbi at a wedding like that. I think it's downright cruel.
Yeah, and you bring up the reciprocity issue. There's an entire halachic discussion. I think there's a chapter of Bava Basra that's dedicated to this, and a few chapters in the Rambam and a section of the Shulchan Aruch about shushavinut, which is basically giving each other money. A person picks his best friends to chip in to help him make the wedding, and they come and drink and make merry with him, and on the assumption that he's going to do likewise for them. And this is such a strong assumption that it's actually something that which we could bring up in court. That is, if I make my wedding and I had you come and you gave for your share of participating in the simcha, and then God willing it comes to your wedding and I don't do likewise, I don't basically return the favor to a similar monetary value, then you can have a lawsuit against me and you can recoup that money in court. Yeah, that's straight up there. This is a very important issue that's been overlooked. But I need to ask you a question. You're talking about what natural shidduchim and how the system that exists today did not exist earlier. You and I know about also the idea of arranged marriages, and that they were going on in Europe in the shtetls, even up to the late 1800s and early 1900s. I think Rebbetzin Meiselman in her book describes how it was still going on. I might be mistaken about that. I shouldn't mention her necessarily by name, but this was something that was going on. This is something that also there's Talmudic discussions about older fathers and older brothers. That's why, like Das Mikro always points out, why the older brothers always mentioned with a shidduch. Elisheva is the sister of Nachshon, and Rivka is the sister of Lavan. Mahalat is the sister of Nevayot. That used to be arranged marriages. To what extent do you believe throughout history were marriages arranged, percentage-wise? Were most people finding their spouses naturally, or are they relying on their parents to do it for them?
Gosh, I'm not a historian, so I don't want to venture an authoritative answer to that. I can give you a personal guess, but I have no authority to this answer. I think it really varied based on the society in which people lived. I think people met in a multitude of ways. Probably there were some shtetls where they just had arranged marriages, where parents, this couple had a son and this couple had a daughter, so they put them together, and that's just the way things were done in some places. In other places, it was done other ways. I personally think that all the options should be open to singles. I have a lot of negative things to say about the matchmaking industry, and we'll get to that later, I guess. But there is a place for matchmakers. There's a place for online dating, which obviously didn't exist until very recently. There's a place for singles events. There's a place for all of these things. It shouldn't be that singles have to choose based more on social reasons and politics and perceived levels of frumkeit, that you're either going to do it this way or you're going to do it that way. It should be a personal choice. If singles feel that the best option for them is to go to a matchmaker and say, please help me find somebody, like you go to somebody help you find a job and you pay them a fee for finding you, that fine, do that. But it shouldn't be that either you're going to singles events and parties and bars, or you're going to a matchmaker. And singles should choose for themselves what works for them. And all of the various methods of meeting that are out there should be drastically improved, because all of them are terribly, terribly flawed the way they're done today. The matchmaking, the way it's done today, is done horribly. It causes more pain than good. The singles events are terribly run. They have very low rates of success. And online dating is a dismal failure. I mean, you have thousands and thousands of singles been through the mill of these various websites. A very tiny percentage of them get married, and I know this for a fact because the numbers that they themselves advertise all gloat that they made a certain number of marriages. But if you add up the number of years that these websites have been in existence, and you even take a reasonable guess as to how many singles have been using their services over that long period of time, it's a dismal failure. The average single would need to be signed up for these websites for hundreds and hundreds of years on average until they met their match. It's basically playing the lottery, but they're paying $20 a month to have this faint hope that maybe they'll get a match online. So online dating needs to be drastically improved. Some people have met that way, so there is room for it to exist, but right now it's a dismal failure.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about the ideological issues and the principles behind In the Madness, but I'm going to save something provocative, my own personal opinion with regards to this. I'm going to save that for a little bit later. I want you to disagree with me and explain why, even though I don't know if you'll convince me. What can you tell me about In the Madness? The two major issues there, the principles.
Okay, And the Madness, first of all, is a grassroots campaign that I started when I was a graduate student at YU almost 20 years ago. Right now, it's just a website with archives. It's not really active anymore. In its heyday, I had a small group of volunteers working with me, really like anywhere from 3 to 7 people at any given time. It was never very large. We worked with no budget whatsoever. We didn't accept outside funding because we didn't want to get involved with politics or having to responsibly use other people's money. It was entirely self-funded. We ran dozens and dozens of events. They weren't singles events. Many of them weren't open necessarily only to singles, but they all provided opportunities for singles to meet in a natural, pleasant way. Okay. And my purpose in running these events was really to model the way events could be run better. I was not interested in getting to the singles events business or making money out of it. I never did. I lost money on many of my events. I was doing it only to model for others how it could be done and then hoping other people would copy that. So End the Madness, the goal of End the Madness was really to show that there is a better way. And there's 2 tracks in order to accomplish this. One is to educate people about the proper attitudes, values, goals, Torah perspective to bring into dating. And then the other one is to create more and better opportunities for people to meet. And if you do one without the other, you're not going to be successful. Meaning if people have the proper attitudes and ideas about dating, but they don't have mechanisms to meet people, then they're not meeting people. And if people have mechanisms to meet people, but they have faulty attitudes, it's not going to work out. They're either going to just, go out on dates that don't go anywhere. They'll have relationships that don't go anywhere, or God forbid, they'll get married, and the marriage will be a disaster. We don't want that either. So you have to educate people about how to date and what things they should be looking for, and at the same time, create more and better opportunities for people to meet. That's really the dual track that I was doing with End the Madness for many, many years, and just trying to teach people how to do things better. And that still exists, even though I'm not running events anymore, but the website is still, at least people are able to read all the articles. I'm constantly writing more articles. We have videos now, and that's really what I've been trying to accomplish with End the Madness, literally ending the madness, the insanity of the shidduch world, because you have intelligent people in other aspects of their life. We have frum Jews, good people, smart people, but when it comes to dating, they're insane. They're really mad about how they date. They have no clue what they're doing, and they're really off their rockers. So I'm trying to bring sanity and true Torah values back to the shidduch world.
Do you have any has anybody reached out to you and said that yes, you changed their life, like you enlightened them, and thanks to you, they were able to overcome whatever it was, and they found the proper shidduch?
Gosh, many people. First of all, there are approximately 20 couples that we know of who met through the events that we ran. And I don't take personal credit for them because I don't take blame for the people who didn't meet. I don't take credit like a shadchan takes credit for, people who get married, but they don't take any of the blame when it doesn't work out.
Poor things.
The only thing that I take credit for is for running programs properly and giving people the opportunity to have a positive experience. Anything after that is totally up to them. And I'm glad that I was able to be a conduit for people to meet and marry. So those people definitely were affected. Many people contacted me over the years that something that they read in one of my articles, a light bulb went off in their head or helped them to sort of clarify something to themselves. But I'll tell you, one of the best stories that I have, one of the best impact stories that I have dates back to the very first days of End the Madness, when it was only a website with a message board. I never even had any plans to run any events at that time. I just made a website, which at the time was my brief analysis of what was wrong with the shidduch world and what needed to be done to fix it. I made what I called a covenant of basically 10 principles that I wanted people to agree to in their dating practices. Okay. And to basically sign their name to it to give chizuk to others who knew that I was right in my analysis of the shidduch world, that there were certain basic problems with it that needed to be fixed. And they just agreed to do things in this better, healthier, more Torah-dic way. And we had a message board with different topics that people could talk about. And very shortly after the message board went live, there was a message that was posted publicly by a woman who said that she was on the verge of leaving the Orthodox world. She was an older single woman. She must have been in her late 30s at the time, I think. And she said she was on the verge of leaving the Orthodox world. She was so fed up with the way she was being treated in the shidduch world, with the lack of proper opportunities. She was thinking of dating non-Jewish men because in her job, she was treated very, very, very well. People thought very highly of her. She was very good at her job. She was a professional. But when it came to the Orthodox world, she was seen as this loser, older single that nobody really thought of. She was on the verge of leaving the Orthodox world, and now that she saw that some people, at least, are speaking about it and taking it seriously, she was going to think twice about that. I never heard from her again. I don't know what happened to her, but that's a success story. Because many singles, I'll tell you, many singles, once they hit their 30s or so, the men typically, they don't go to shul as much. They maybe give up on their learning. Their frumkeit starts to slip away. The women tend to stop dressing as modestly. Maybe they figure if I can't meet a man that way, I'll try to meet a man a different way. It's very hard for singles to stay strong in their levels of frumkeit when they're aging as singles. They see their prospects dwindling. They see their dreams of having a family and a family life and children dwindling. And they see that in the Orthodox world, they're not being cared for, they're not being taken seriously, and they're being looked down upon. It's very hard. Many people leave Orthodoxy from that. And that's like the silent victims of the shidduch world that we don't hear about. It's not just the people who are struggling to get married, but the people who literally opt out of being Orthodox. And there's a lot of people like that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the issue of parental involvement? Are parents involved? Are parents involved in the wrong way? Are parents involved in the right way, and they're not involved too much? What would you say about that?
Parents should be involved, like in any aspect that affects a child's life, and certainly who they choose to marry is, if not the most important decision a child will make, it's certainly one of them. Parents should be involved in offering guides and offering help as long as they're being helpful. I'll tell you a beautiful story, which I write about in my End the Madness book, and this is not only for parents, but anybody who wants to help singles. I went to the Blind Museum many years ago in Israel. And if anybody hasn't heard of it, it's basically a place where you get to experience for a short time what blind people go through. Everything there is pitch black, and you go in a group, and you have a blind guide giving you a tour of the place, and you're brought to different rooms, and you have to kind of forage around and guess what room you're in and find different things and try to figure out how to accomplish a certain task without being able to see anything. And of course, the blind people are very adept at this because this is what they do all the time. And the people who have sight really struggle with this. And the hope is that they get a greater appreciation for what blind people go through in life. Mm-hmm. So there was one point where we had the opportunity to just, sit in a cafe, totally in the dark, ordering food and drinks. And we were able to ask any questions of our blind tour guide, who happened to be a very brilliant person, very, very accomplished. He lived on his own. He was an expert in many fields, very, very accomplished, far more than people who didn't have this handicap. So one person asked him, if you see a blind person walking down the street and he is about to bump into a tree, should you help him? Should you move him away that he doesn't bump into the tree, right? You're trying to help the guy. And the blind man gave a counterintuitive answer. He said, no, you should not. Because the blind man needs to touch things along the way to know where he is. He needs to know that there's a tree here, and there's a crack in the sidewalk there, and there's a mailbox over there, and a fire hydrant there. By touching things, even by accident, he now is oriented. And if you don't allow him to touch anything, you're disorienting him. That's a counterintuitive answer. I never would have thought of that, but once he tells it to you, it's obvious. So then the person asks a follow-up question. So what should I do? Right? If I see a blind person walking down the street and I think he's going down the wrong way and I want to help, what should I do? And the blind person gave a brilliant answer, which I tied into the shidduch world. And really, any time you want to help somebody about anything, ask him if you can help him or how you can help him, and respect the answer. And I think that was so insightful, especially in the shidduch world. People just assume that they know what's right for a single, whether it's a parent or a total stranger calling you up. I have a guy for you. I have a girl for you. I know what's right for you. I know what's best for you. First, ask if or how you can help the person on their terms, and respect the answer. Don't assume you know what's best for them. And even if you think you do know what's best for them, it's still their life, and you have to respect it. You have to respect these personal boundaries that they set up for themselves. And then, and only then, will you really be able to help them in a positive way. We have a shidduch world today where parents are going behind the backs of singles to the shadchanim, because they don't want the children to know that the parents are involved. Maybe there were some issues there. So the shadchan is calling up, and there's all kinds of trickery going on to try to trick people to go out on dates and trick people to do what they wouldn't otherwise do. I don't think it's creating a healthy atmosphere for anybody. certainly in the long run, it's not going to help singles.
Mm-hmm.
So parents should be involved, but be involved in an open and respectful way.
I asked this obviously because before I was talking about arranging marriages, in the olden days, it wasn't unheard of. As a matter of fact, it was actually they considered a father's and brother's right to arrange these marriages, although the matched people could refuse. Nowadays, it's almost unheard of, at least in the Western world. Although perhaps the Hasidim are doing something similar to that. I don't know if that's completely arranged as it was in the olden days. But certainly the fact that parents are less involved or they're assumed that they have almost no involvement has changed things. I don't know for the better or for the worse, but it's certainly a change. There's no one here who's going to come home one day and say they're going to get the surprise. Congratulations, we've arranged a marriage for you. That's
Right.
not practical. We're expecting nowadays kids to, for whatever reason, I don't know why, they're expecting them to somehow get a complete education in Jewish day school, and that somehow includes, even though it's not part of the curriculum, somehow that includes also how to find a proper spouse.
Well, that's actually a major part of the problem. I'm really glad that you brought that up. This
Okay.
is something that everybody needs to learn, and it's just assumed that people will pick it up along the way, or they'll figure it out once they start dating, or they'll go to some dating mentor after they're already in their 20s and they're handicapped and they're brainwashed and they got all kinds of crazy ideas. Then they'll get somebody to fix them. I mean, how about not breaking them in the first place? And then they don't need to go to dating mentors and therapists and coaches and all of these cottage industries. The whole thing is a sham anyway. These people are basically telling you, let me just rant a little bit about this. If people want real dating advice and dating mentorship, don't go to some coach. Visit a nursing home and just speak to some old timers at random. They will give you better dating advice, more truthful dating advice, and you'll be doing a mitzvah at the same time. And they won't be charging you any money or timing you 45-minute sessions or whatever. They'll be happy to talk to you as long as you want, and they'll give you better dating advice. Don't go to these coaches who don't know anything. They're teaching you common sense at the very best. Any person, a taxi driver could give you coaching better than most of these people.
I was more wondering what parents need to tell their kids already in high school or even earlier than that, or what the schools should be doing. What can the high schools do, if any?
I think that a Torah-based education, like you brought in some lessons from the Parsha, this certainly should be part of it. Parents should be educating the children in conjunction with the schools. Like every aspect of a life, it's a partnership between the parents and the schools. I think that the education at the very minimum should start in the high school. In fact, I think that people should start, and this is also something I wrote about in my book, I think singles should start looking for somebody to marry before they're actually ready to get married. Meaning, let's say the optimal age for people to start dating, to pick a number, let's say it's 22. And I don't think there should be a magic number. I think it also varies from person to person. But let's just say a person will be ready to get married at 22. He shouldn't start looking. All right, he shouldn't start looking on his 22nd birthday. He should start looking when he's 20 or 21, when he's almost ready to get married, with the hope that by the time he's ready now to get married, he will have already found that person, right? Just as when a person is looking for a job, he doesn't wait until he finishes school and he's out on the street and he's paying rent, says, okay, now I'm ready to start working, so I'll start looking for a job. You start looking for a job 6 months in advance. A year in advance, you already start looking for a job, hoping that it'll coincide by the time you finish school and you're ready to work, you'll be able to find that job. When a person's looking for a home or a school, it's the same thing. When it comes to marriage, for some reason, we don't do this very sensible approach, right? We shave off very precious years, a year or two, on the earlier end of people's lives when they could be already meeting people. Why? Because of this fear. Maybe you'll meet somebody when you're 20 and you'll fall madly in love, but you're not ready to get married until you're 22, and now you have to deal with all this tension. And you know what my answer to that is? Halavai. That's a very happy problem to deal with. That you met the love of your life and you're just not ready to get married for another few months. Deal with it. That's a very happy problem to have.
Yeah.
Have that extra year or two on the early end to start looking and start clarifying. So hopefully by the time you're ready to get married, you will have already found that person. At the very least, you will have a head start in that process. That should be part of the education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. Or I've already started talking to my own children about this type of thing, that they should keep their eyes and their minds open, because especially around here, there's some of the young people I've met through perfectly kosher ways in public and through the community, and it's been perfect shidduchim, and it works for them. And sometimes it happens really early, and they just have to have the right person showing them that that which is happening to them is a good thing, and it's meant to be, and that's how it used to work, and that's how God intended it. And
maybe some people will start getting married a little bit earlier than they previously planned. And you know what? That's also a good thing. I think it's a bracha for people to get married younger rather than later. Nowadays, and this is a major problem in many segments of the Orthodox world. People are choosing voluntarily to start dating and by necessity getting married much later than they used to. The average age of people starting to get married is much older. That means fewer children. It means the search is more complicated because people are more set in their ways and their lifestyle. They're not as flexible when it comes to moving, changing a career, growing with the person. Singles become more picky and set in their ways the older they get. People think singles get more flexible and more open-minded. It's just the opposite. The older singles are, the more used they are to a certain lifestyle, and they need to fit somebody into that lifestyle. And the other person already has a full lifestyle as well. So you're basically taking two full lives and trying to make room for each other at an older age. It's much easier for singles who don't really have a life yet. They're still in school. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know where they're going to live. They haven't planned everything out. And now they have a partner and they grow together and figure everything out together. It's much, much easier that way, and it's much better that way. So I think singles need to, focus less on the school, the career, traveling the world, experience everything life has to offer. It's much better to get married early and start at the bottom, as Rabbi Tendler said at the very first, and the Madness event. You don't start off having a fancy apartment and everything in life neatly organized when you first get married. You start off at the bottom with a partner and you work your way up, and that's fine. That's really the way things always were until today. Singles are expected to start off already modeling the lifestyle of their parents from the first day of their marriage.
Yeah, that's unrealistic expectations are a perfect way to begin a failure. You have to start off with reality-based perceptions. So now I'm going to tell you something that I believed once upon a time. I think you would disagree with it now. I'm not quite sure of it today because I have to look up the Talmudic sources once again. But I said this once, and I think I helped someone. I was of the belief back in yeshiva days. So let's put this back at least 16 or 17 years ago. When I was in yeshiva, there were some guys who were older than me. Now I was a 22-year-old who, thank God, had many dating opportunities. I think I was quite lucky actually back in yeshiva. But there were some guys who were, let's say, 24 or 25 already, and I didn't look at them as pathetic or anything like that. It's just they themselves had been in the dating world for quite a while. I think there were some legendary Ben Azai guys there who, they heard they had been on 100 blind dates or something like that. I spoke to one guy who was just a little bit older than me, maybe max 3 years older than me. He was still single. He did get married shortly thereafter. But I told him that I'd come across a teaching of the sages that they used to punish physically through lashes bachelors. Bachelors who had gotten to a certain age, they would lash them for not being married. And I asked this older. He wasn't older objectively, but subjectively to me, he was an older guy. And I told him, why is it that the sages said that? Perhaps he can't find a shidduch. There's the deck is stacked against him, etc. And the madness. There's too much madness. He's not finding a shidduch. The shadchanim. Why is it that the sages would punish this fellow physically? And it must be because really the sages believe that it's the men's fault. If the shidduchim aren't happening, it's because the men aren't going out there and doing what they're supposed to do, convincing the women. It says, take a wife, lakach. Rashi says a few times, when it says someone lakach someone else, he took someone else, it means he talked them into it. When you and I would call persuade or convince, persuade or convince. And nowadays there's a new Hebrew word, shachnea. But back then that was taking someone. That's perhaps what Korach did. It says he took people, or he talked people into doing what he did. And I even quoted a right-wing TV pundit who should not be quoted, but at least he said it right. Only a loser can't get a girlfriend. And I thought that perhaps that was the case, that for certain guys in yeshiva, it's not the system. It's that they're not going out there and doing what they need to do to get themselves married. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, there is no source, at least in the Talmud Bavli, of anybody getting lashes for not getting married. There is no such source like that. The source I believe you have in mind is in Ki Yedushin, where I forget the names of the people, but there was somebody who was praised, like a young Torah scholar was praised to the older sage for being a great Torah scholar, and he was presented to this older sage. And he saw that he was not married because the married people dressed in a certain way. They wore a talis or something, a kaftan or something to indicate that they were married. So he turned his face from him and says, I don't want to see you again until you're married. He gave him some sharp mussar. There was never any physical punishment for that, but it was clearly frowned upon for men, at the very least, to be at a certain age and not be married. But that was by choice. I mean, if we're talking about singles who are choosing not to get married or to push off marriage in favor of school, career, busyness in life, and they don't value marriage, they don't see it as the ikr, as something that transcends and comes first, then that's a problem. That is a Musar problem. That is a Torah problem. Their values are skewed. And men and women have this problem. I think women today increasingly have this problem. The women now are all liberated. They're all conquering the world. And that's something that is not talked about. That has had a devastating impact on the shidduch world. We talk about things that have changed in the last 20 to 50 years. Nothing has had a bigger impact in the shidduch world than the changing role and values and attitudes of women in all segments of the Orthodox. This is permeated in different ways, all segments of the Orthodox world. If women are viewing their role and their goals and values in life are different than what they've been, that's going to have a massive impact on how they date and marry or perhaps choose not to. That is not talked about nearly often enough, but the feminist movement has had a devastating impact on the shidduch world. And that's something maybe we'll talk about at a different time. But in reference to your question about people not being capable of being married, look, you have some people who need help. Some people maybe go out on dates and they always make a bad impression. They do things that no person could possibly accept. No, yeah. It could be. It could be. Everybody has flaws and shortcomings. But I'll tell you something. I look around, and there's a lot of married people that I don't think are very marriageable. And you know what? They found somebody who loves them for who they are and married them, and maybe they have some imperfections too, and they made it work. And I don't think it's very easy to zero in on singles and point out all their flaws and say, you're not married because of this and that and the other thing, and just give them a whole laundry list of all the reasons why no person in the world would ever want to live with them. And I think that's really cruel. I think that's really cruel because you don't have to be perfect to get married. A person should always be working on themselves and trying to improve themselves, obviously. But you don't have to be perfect in order to be marriageable. You don't have to be everything to everyone in order to get marriageable. You have to find somebody who likes you, who loves you and accepts you and wants to be your partner as you are. And then hopefully to grow up. Not somebody who wants to change you, not somebody who thinks you have potential but they want to change you. No, it's somebody who would be happy to be with you exactly as you are right now, and of course hope that you will continue to grow together. It's very unfair the way people point fingers at singles and assume that if a single is single past a certain age, then either they're not serious about getting married or there must be something wrong with them and we should send them for therapy. It's absolutely horrible.
No, I was saying that perhaps they would get whipped, but okay, therapy.
Whipping. No, there's no such thing. No such thing.
Now I'm going to have to double check this. I have to do my homework better. What do you think of the proposition? I heard this a few times about a decade ago. I think Rabbi Bar Chaim might have even suggested this in passing. I mentioned him when we were not during the broadcast, so you're going to have to look this up afterwards. Some people have suggested, at least for the women, if we could allow polygamy once again.
Polygamy, for God's sake. Why do people always dredge up polygamy? First of all, there's a reason why they call it tzara. Okay, that's first of all.
Well,
second of all,
clarify for those at home. Tzara doesn't mean it's that polygamy is an affliction, that the co-wives, two women.
Right, co-wives. That you're already married, but you take a second wife, like some of the Arabs and Bedouins, right? Yeah. First of all,
yes,
it's hard enough to find one woman to marry happily that's going to work out well. Let's let everybody first find one, and when everybody finds one and they're all happy and satisfied, and maybe there's a few women that are still left over somehow. Maybe we'll get them married and double people up. That makes no sense to me. Second of all, what woman wants to be a second wife? I mean, how do you put that on your shidduch resume? How do you go out with a woman and say, I'm already married, but I'm looking for a second wife?
Well,
I don't understand how that's even practical.
Some women in history who didn't mind being second wives, apparently.
Be that as it may, to float that as a possibility nowadays, I think is silly. I don't see any basis for it. It's not practical. It wouldn't fly. And even if theoretically, from a Torah standpoint, you were able to find a heter for it, which is highly questionable. But let's say that were feasible, it would only split the Orthodox world even more than it already is split. We don't need to find more things to argue about and fight about. I see very minimal benefit to the idea. Very hard to imagine a scenario where this is really making a positive impact. I just see this just going to create more chaos and more problems. I don't think that's an answer for anything.
I also believe, now my own personal opinions about the polygamy thing. I'm not an advocate for it. I think it's ridiculous. As someone who's in-laws also, I cannot understand why any man would want to have multiple in-laws to deal with.
Yeah,
But
that's also.
yeah, aside from the obvious humor, I think that of course it was Talmudist sages who basically promulgated the edict that Jewish men should no longer practice polygamy because they realized that the institution is not to the benefit of the women. It is also known that the sages certainly did not advocate for such a thing. Rav Soloveitchik has an essay about this. It was something that even our patriarchs only did because they had no other recourse at the time. Avraham Avinu was not an advocate of polygamy, and he was wealthy even. And polygamy was basically something limited to the very rich, or even basically the people who were kings. If they weren't kings with the crown, at least they were the people who were, for whatever reason, the top of the food chain. And even then, it's not something that's recommended by any means, not by the Torah, not by the sages. I was just asking because I think that these types of things get floated when we talk about, the problems of the shidduch world.
I don't know why these things are being floated when there are real problems and real solutions and real things that we could be doing. We don't need to be talking about nonsense. I don't understand why people bring it up, honestly.
Okay. Before we go, we have 3 minutes. What do we need to know? Let's say people are approaching me. Oh, wow, I'm almost middle-aged. Got some white hairs here. Not in the shidduch world. I have less opportunities to make shidduchim for friends nowadays. What can I do to help end the madness?
Okay, first of all, like I said, the next time you have a simcha, and you should be blessed with many simchas in your life, have mixed seating for the singles. And if people don't like it, that's their problem. This is something that we need to do. It is the right thing to do, and it is the urgent call of the hour. That's what we need to do. Second of all, try to help singles on their own terms. I think when people are trying to find matches for singles, they have to really know the people very well, and they have to care about them. And they have to not impose their will on the singles, but be a helper. Be somebody who's really on the side of the singles and really helping them on their terms. It's not for everybody to do. It's something that requires a great deal of time and patience and effort and emotional energy. People say everybody should be a shadchan. No, everybody should not be a shadchan because you can cause a lot of damage to people. And it's not a mitzvah if it isn't done the right way. There's no mitzvah to harm people or hurt people, even if you have the best of intentions. Mm-hmm. And it's not meant to be easy. The shidduch profiles are intended to make things easier for the shadchanim. I've written a lot about this. We don't have time to talk about it. I think they've totally backfired and caused more harm than good. But they're intended to make life easy for the shadchan. The shadchan's life is not supposed to be easy. Finding a soulmate for a person is not easy work. You have to really be dedicated to it. You have to care about people. And you can't find a soulmate for a person if you don't know anything about their soul. I don't understand how matchmaking is done today, where people have an index card of basic facts and figures, and they just shuffle them around and propose matches. How do you find a soulmate for somebody if you don't know anything about their soul and you don't even want to know and you don't have the time to find out?
Well, the broken clock is right twice a day, so just randomly sometimes it'll work.
Yeah, the problem is that many singles are being broken permanently because of this. Yeah. It's not worth it. I don't believe in human sex sacrifice. That's the issue. It should be possible to help people without damaging everybody in the outskirts. So there's a lot of things that we can do. I would strongly recommend people to read my articles, buy my books. They're not expensive. I don't do this for money. Go on my website, watch my videos. It's all there. And there's a lot that can be done. We've only barely scratched the surface. And hopefully we'll be able to continue the conversation. And people need to get involved. And they need to not be afraid to do things the right way. There's a lot of fear. And there's a lot of social pressure. People need to not pay attention to that. Do the right thing. Do what's because people's lives are literally at stake. And the stakes are too high for people to worry about what other people are going to say, what other people are going to think. We just have to do the right thing.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so Rabbi Chananya Weissman, of course, just plugged his website. Go check it out. Buy his books, although they're not for profit, but I still think they're a good read. And, of course, read his columns. You can find Rabbi Weissman's last interview with us on YouTube and on Facebook, and this one will be on YouTube also. I'd like to remind everybody that Haggadah Pesach is still for sale, the Hebrew edition. We're still trying to raise money and pre-sell copies so that we can go to print with the English version of Haggadah Pesach, which, God willing, we will put into use this year. For the first time in a really long time, we're going to offer Korban Pesach. We'll also live to see the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, God willing. We will live to go on the pilgrimage all together, see the ingathering of the exiles. Don't forget, like, share, and subscribe. Send in your questions or comments. And I'd like to thank you for joining us again. Those of you who are watching at home, thank Rabbi Weissman for joining us again. Always interesting to hear from you. I'm thinking we have to hear about the issue of divorce and how that mixes things up. But our time is done for today, so we'll speak to you next time.
That's
Have a
great.
good one.
Thanks for having me again.
Shabbat Shalom.